Okay. This is Q&A, guys. Fire away. Yeah.
What is the Shekhinah, and why is the concept of Shekhinah not a problem for the unity of God?
Everything that we talk about is what God does. No problem with unity if an agent does many different things. Shekhinah is a way in which God creates a manifestation of His presence. That's all. But it's not God. It's not part of God. It's not another God. How's it shown? It's nothing like that.
It's creation itself.
There are two things to say. It's a creation, and it is a form of divine action, and those two might be the same. According to some ways of looking at malachim, that's what they are. A malach is a thing, but it isn't in any way an independent thing, not even in its functioning. So it's a thing that God creates and uses and manipulates and causes to act in certain ways. So it is, in effect, carrying a form of divine functioning. So those two, its significance is that it carries a form of divine functioning. That's the best short thing to say. What's noch? Yeah.
Trying to think the best way to phrase the question. According to my understanding of how the Rambam views the next world, it seems to be a very much based on the person's intellect. Thereby, there are thinkers who hold that if a person didn't believe in one of the Yud Gimel and Koren, he wouldn't have a place in the world to come. He wouldn't be able to have a relationship with God, not so much as a punishment, just more as a result. You've said previously that if a non-Jew does good deeds, acts with kindness, he doesn't get any of that necessarily attributed to him as good deeds as we do.
I didn't say about a non-Jew. I said about a non-believer.
Someone who didn't believe in God.
That's right.
Now, I was curious, is that working along the same pattern as the Rambam? Meaning, because he doesn't believe in God, everything he is doing is disconnected with the true reality. Thereby, he's not creating any true reality in the next world. Are they connected?
Oh, the quick answer is I don't know. Let me think about it. The root idea in the second thing you're mentioning is very simple. These are mitzvos, they're commandments. You have no relationship to a commandment if you don't believe in the commander. If you happen to be doing what the commandment instructs one to do, that you are not fulfilling the commandment. You're not obeying the commandment.
I'm thinking.
I know what you're thinking, but I'm just saying the second idea has a very simple base. It doesn't need that kind of elaborate connection. Now, the question whether you can go beyond that to make the connection, I don't see any direct connection. There's a certain similarity, but I don't see any direct connection. The picture you need to have is where the commander in the army says, I order you to shut the door, and the soldier does not hear the command, doesn't understand the command, but he's cold. So he goes and shuts the door. He has not obeyed the command. By accident, he did what the command required done, but he did not obey the command. Same thing's true with a person who gives charity or pursues justice because he thinks it's nice, or he thinks human beings have to live up to that, or something like that. That's not obeying the divine commandment, because the commander and the commandment play no role in the action that he's performing. Okay. I'm beginning to get onto your train. The whole idea is that in the performance, there's a connection with the commander, with God. It links you to God. You're expressing your action in terms of fulfilling God's will. And that's what forges this connection. Now, of course, if you don't believe in the commander, and your action just happens to fortuitously agree with what the commandment would require, then there's no connection. Now you're saying a person who lacks the fundamental beliefs for the Rambam doesn't have that connection. Since he doesn't have the connection, he has no place in the world to come. And maybe so. I didn't think of it, but maybe so.
Okay, then if that's the case to some extent, doesn't God have a overall want for goodness in the world, of kindness, of chesed, without it being directly related to command? Because you said previously that there are certain things we would know without God commanding them, which means they're good without God telling us they're good. Thereby, if a non-Jew acts with kindness and tries to raise the level of kindness in the world, if this isn't the case and he's not creating his next world like the Rambam says, surely he should be getting lots of goodness.
Okay, that's a good question, and I struggled with that for a long time, and I had a view on it, and some of my advanced Talmidim were fighting me about it for a while, and now I'm drifting in their direction. Yes, there are certain things that we have to know, we do know are right without God telling us. But maybe what we know without His telling us is that He wants us to do it. Maybe that's what's right about them. And this would, you could have an allied, similar idea that even an atheist would know it's right to do this, but he would not have the correct concept of right. He would not have the correct concept of good, and it might not serve to connect him in that way. In other words, let's take, for example, the idea of mitzvah shvichas chaman. A mitzvah needs the intention to fulfill the divine will. Now, when Maimonides says in the guide that if there's a mitzvah that's logical that you have to perform, so then even if no prophet commanded it, if you perform it, you'll be rewarded. What happened to the kavanah? What happened to the intention to fulfill God's will? Is that subtracted in this case? The answer may be that no, we're talking about a person who knows there's a God, who knows there's a creator, who knows that he gave a Torah, but this he doesn't know about. And he figures out on his own that this is right, but right ultimately means is what God wants for the world. And then it will connect him to God, even though God didn't command it. To say that he figures out that it's good in some other sense, some other non-religious sense, non-theological sense, and he does it, and he's going to be rewarded by God for doing that, that's not obviously true. At least if you wanted to make it true, you'd need an extra argument. And my students kept telling me, we don't have the other half of the argument, and I haven't been able to provide it. So I'm driven back to a more conservative view that what it means to say that I know that it's right is that I'm using the intellect that God gave me, and the intellect teaches me something about how God wants the world to be run, and it teaches it to me. The source of the idea is my own, because that's the way God made me, to be able to figure things like that out.
So the result of this would be an absolute materialistic atheist would fall out of this.
That's right.
Someone who believes in, I don't know, something out there would be in.
So that depends. I'll tell you, the Rambam says clearly a non-Jew, who, and this would apply all the more so to a Jew, a non-Jew only gets credit for the mitzvahs that he does if he believes that they were given by God to Moses at Sinai, and that's why he's doing them. Even a non-Jew has to do it because they come from God, and specifically through Moses at Sinai. Without that, his performances don't count. So it's not just having nice moral intuitions.
No, you're going back to commandments. It's not, I'm saying God's motivation to increase the level of chesed in the world.
Yeah.
Chesed exists without a commandment.
I'm saying no, because if that were so, you're describing a person who, through his own moral intuition, does what the commandment prescribes without his believing in the commandment. I say if that's going to hold, and specifically because he wants to increase chesed in the world, what about all those people who do what the commandments require and don't do it because of Moses? Why should they lose out? Where's the kindness for them? But no, it's built into the good performance that it has to be done as fulfillment of God's will. The only question is whether he has to inform you of his will, or you can use your own intellect to figure out what's right, but attributing what's right to his will.
But that won't work because it's not going through Moshe Rabbeinu, specifically.
Well, I'm saying at the very least.
Okay.
At the very least. Yeah. And no, that's not right either, because that's for the 7 commandments. We're now talking about extra things.
Yes.
Yeah, what else is on people's minds? Yeah.
Can I build something on what he said then?
Sorry, say again?
I want to build something. Just
Sure.
So, my question more relates to case, so say you take someone who was a young child, like let's kind of go back to like the 4 sons for Pesach, right? You have the child, the simpleton who doesn't really know anything, just is a very, very basic understanding, and you have somebody who can't speak. Basically, they don't even have the capability of knowing. They just have never had the opportunity. Okay, you have this very small child who does, basically they imitate their parents. They watch somebody who does something around them, and so they do the deed because they see other people doing it. They see that it's the right thing to do. Okay, so their understanding comes from the shchuna, from their surroundings. Okay, so does that mean that even if the shchuna itself is a religious shchuna and it is all coming from a place of the commandments, but this specific child doesn't even know about the commandments yet, is that child not getting credit for something that they're learning from the area around them and from the neighborhood?
A child of that age gets no credit for anything.
At all.
No credit for anything. You only get credit when you arrive at the age of responsibility. And, according to many, the age of responsibility in terms of divine credit is 20. At 13, you become an adult for social and political and this worldly circumstances. After 13, if a person performs a crime, he's tried in an earthly court and can be punished for what he does. He can perform mitzvos and so forth and so on. But as far as divine reward and punishment, starts at the age of 20. So the 8-year-old is just learning. That's all. Just learning. Yeah.
There are a lot of Jews that don't even know they're Jewish. A lot of people that families assimilated early on and they don't have no idea of being Jewish at all. So what is the divine plan for them? How they can live. They have people who live their entire lives and not have any connection to Judaism whatsoever. So what's their...
It's a one-word answer to that question. It's Gilgul. Gilgul means reincarnation. Reincarnation is a cardinal Jewish belief, and it's very important. Without it, there are many questions, which I don't know how to answer otherwise. But the mistake that you're working on is you start from birth to death. That's a life. You think of that as the career of a soul, and you ask, what significance did it have? What meaning did it have? What chance did it have? Answer is that's one chapter in a career of a soul that has 472 chapters. And it has chapters beforehand and chapters afterwards. And the significance of the soul's career is carried by the 472 chapters as a whole. And you're seeing 1 out of 472. Of course, you're not going to see the entire significance of that soul's performance. That's crucial, I think, for many, many such questions. People always ask, well, a child was born and dies at the age of 10, right? So what did it do? What happened? Nothing. Never got to the age of responsibility. Answer is, that's only one stage in a multi-stage career. Yeah.
What's the point of that chapter?
What's the point of that chapter? I mean, the one where the child dies. A person, I'll just give you an example, but I think you could use your imagination afterward. Let's imagine a person suffers in a way that he has no clue why he's suffering. No clue why he's suffering. Maybe something left over from, but he has no clue why he's suffering. You say, well, what's the point of the suffering? Isn't the point of suffering to teach us, to inspire us, to enable us to become better people? So if he has no clue why he's suffering, then it doesn't seem to have any purpose, doesn't seem to have any function. Let's imagine that this person, this soul, 500 years ago, was a pirate. One of the things he did was he sailed from port to port with his pirates and kidnapped people. In particular, he kidnapped infants and took them 2,000 miles away and sold them as slaves. That child is kidnapped at the age of 1.5, sold at the age of 1 3/4, grows up in Bombay, has no memory of where he came from, no memory of who his parents are. All he knows is he's a slave. He's always been a slave. How did he get to be a slave? Why is he a slave? No clue. That's what this person did. This person put another human being into a situation where he is suffering without having any clue why he's suffering. So that's what could be happening to the soul in this incarnation. That soul is being put through precisely the same experience that it caused somebody else to have, so that later, when memory is restored, it can see what it meant, what it did before, appropriately regret what it did before, so forth and so on. I'm just pointing out, the general message here is that once you have an expanded view that there's a multi-stage existence, and the stages have to integrate with one another over a long period of time, so then looking at one stage is going to be very difficult to make sense out of. But the human circumstances are various beyond our ability to even imagine. And for each event that takes place, it's going to be some significance either in the past or in the future that will be carried through. I don't know how much you know about amnesia. People think of amnesia as losing your memory. Well, they can still talk. They don't lose their memory of language. They don't forget how to ride a bicycle. They don't forget how to dial a telephone. They forget certain specific facts about their history. And as I'm told, if they, previous to the injury that caused the amnesia, were afraid of the water, they'll still be afraid of the water. Now, they won't know why they're afraid of the water, but that carries over from the pre-amnesia incident. They say have the same thing with souls. The fact that the soul comes into a new existence with a new body, there are residues of what happened to the soul in the past, which that soul brings with it into the world. I hope that the old fantasy of a tabula rasa, a child is born blank and is just programmed by his circumstances, I hope that has passed from the scene. The nature-nurture debate goes through phases about every 15 years. But when you'll be parents, you'll see that if you're a man, the children are different from birth. And if you're a woman, you'll know you did a different in gestation. There's no such thing as just being programmed by the environment. That is a liberal fantasy. Maybe that's redundant. Our children from birth were very different from one another. They're carrying residues, or they're carrying an inherent character, which then gets affected by the environment. It's not created by the environment. The same thing's true with Gilgul, with reincarnation. Usnach, yeah.
It's not really a very deep question. It's more of a comparison. I'm asking because there's no other specific questions. The answer that people give to the fine-tuning of the universe is a multiverse. Could that be parallel towards the answer to the mind-body, the consciousness, the answer to consciousness by panpsychism? Is that a good parallel to say that both based off as no evidence in the same way?
Oh, first, structurally, they're not even structurally parallel. They're not isomorphic at all. They're not structurally parallel at all. The fine-tuning, there's lots and lots and lots to say about it, but just to take your particular thing. The fine-tuning says that the various constants of nature are within very, very narrow limits. If they were at all different, the universe would be entirely different. Particular life would be impossible. Okay, the thought is that couldn't be by accident. Each one should be within a very, very narrow range, and all of it's necessary for life. Change any one of them, life disappears. So it looks like it was designed for life. The multiverse response is there are either an infinity of universes or an unimaginably great finite number of universes, and they vary in every possible way. And then, by chance, one of them will have the right combination for life. The vast, vast majority won't have the right combination for life. And then you don't need any question of designing. There's no question of forming it for that particular purpose, because the fact that you have so many of them means that a few are going to be right for life, and you find yourself one's right for life because you're alive. That's a way to object to the idea that the universe is designed. There's a lot wrong in the question, there's a lot wrong in the answer, but that's the structure of it. You invent a multiverse in order to avoid having to say that this is designed. Now, panpsychism is facing an entirely different problem.
I was asking for a bit of psychology.
Oh, panpsychology. Well, let's just say for the people here. Panpsychism works like this. You have the brain and you have conscious experience. There's a gigantic gap. Many argue that the gap can't possibly be fulfilled. I know the prejudices on university campuses, that's all the brain. That's just prejudice. It's ignorant prejudice. But if you read the people who think carefully about this, some of the best contemporary philosophers will tell you that the gap is impossible to fulfill. Even Bertrand Russell, 100 years ago, who was a great atheist, said that he can't imagine how you can fill that gap. Because the material world has a certain character, and conscious experience has a very different character, and it's very, very difficult to tell how you can build one out of the other. Some people, including Bertrand Russell as an atheist, and now David Chalmers and others, had the following thought. The reason why we are stymied at the gap between atoms and panes is because we think of atoms and panes as so utterly different from one another. maybe an atom is a thought. Maybe an atom is an experience. Maybe conscious experience goes all the way down. An electron is a kind of experience. In support of this idea, Bertrand Russell pointed out, if you will ask science, what is an electron? What is a proton? What is a pion? What is a muon? What is a quark? Everything they will tell you is about how these things relate to one another. All the qualities of elementary particles are how they relate to one another, how they interact with one another. Not a single one says what it is. It only says what it does in interaction with others. Those who have been around for a while may notice a certain similarity of vocabulary that's used often. Talk about, they can't say what God is, only what he does. For example, an electron has mass. What is mass? Mass is resistance to force for acceleration. That's what it's called inertial mass. It's how much inertia that has. So when I add a force to it to make it move, it'll add a certain amount of resistance. That tells me when I add to a force to it, what happens to it. Or charge. They're all negatively charged, so they repel one another. That means when you push them together, it gets harder and harder to push them together because they repel one another. Spin. Spin is an inherent intrinsic angular momentum. It means if you bounce something off it, it doesn't bounce off straight. It bounces off at an angle. That's when you bounce one off the other, this is how they bounce. All the qualities of the elementary particles are what they do in interaction with one another or other things. So Russell said, apparently then, science is not telling me what they are at all. Science is silent as to what they are. Well then, we're free to think of them any way we like. Science is not constraining us in any way. And we have this gigantic problem of how we're going to build a bridge between atoms and thoughts. If we said that the atoms themselves are thoughts, the bridge wouldn't be so big. The gap wouldn't be so big. You have particles. You have a human being who is trillions of cells, which means there's quadrillions or quintillions of particles. If each particle is a very simple, dull thought, you can imagine an electron thinking, this charge, this charge, this charge, this mass, this mass, this mass, this spin, this spin, this spin, right? Put together a few quadrillions of them, and maybe you get very sophisticated thoughts. You're building thoughts out of thoughts, not thoughts out of pebbles. That was the idea. So then it breaks down that barrier. This is not a matter of avoiding the need for an explanation. This is a matter of trying to provide an explanation. In terms of the intellectual move, the multiverse is a way of saying, forget about it, there's no problem. And panpsychism is a way of saying, here's a way forward to ultimately discover how to explain how physical things think, because physical things are made of thoughts at the base. So the move intellectually is in two opposite directions. I don't know what you mean by the psychological effect, but
I didn't give it as much, I suppose, credence. I thought it was, when I heard it, like how to explain consciousness. Well, everything's conscious, in which case...
No.
Thereby, we have our...
No. Now you understand. No. It's a much more sophisticated thing than that.
It struck me as there is something what it's like to be this book.
That's right. It's just...
I hear you now.
Right. It's very clever, and very controversial. Most people don't buy it, but then most people don't buy anything in philosophy. If you have 3 views, so you have at best a plurality. You don't have a majority in favor of anything. Okay, what next is on the table? We're spinning a dice here and pulling up different things as we go. Yeah.
There's a theory called the Khazar theory.
Which theory?
Khazar theory. The idea is that basically that all Ashkenazi Jews are descended from this nation, like you know the
Khazars.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
So we're descended from this nation that converted to Judaism a long time ago. We really don't have any real genetic tie to Eretz Israel. Something that's said by many like anti-Semitic groups, whatever. I don't really know what's the deal with it.
You know, it's a very funny world we live in. The person can say that the table's really made of leprechauns. That's my theory. You know, it's a free world. You can say whatever you like, pronounce whatever syllables you like. I would like to know what evidence there is for that, number one. But number two, let's suppose you have a people with a history and with a culture, let's say religious belief and so on and so on. And let's say that they're very successful in attracting converts. Let's say in one generation, they have a million people and they attract 2 million converts. Does that swamp their history? They no longer have the same history. They no longer have the same identity. They no longer have the same territorial claims because they made lots of converts? I don't think so. The United States of America grew from immigration. It didn't grow from spontaneous birth. It grew from immigration. Shall we say that after 100 years, when the number of immigrants far outweigh the original people, that the original states, the original legislatures don't function anymore because there's so many immigrants who came in? Of course not. The fact that you have a group of people with their own identity and their own history and their own sense of group, people want to join that group and become part of it, just strengthens the group. It doesn't swamp its history, its identity. So let's say the Khazars, the Khazars did convert. It is a historical event. They did convert, and their kingdom lasted for a couple hundred years. Then it disappeared. Not obvious that all of Ashkenazi Jewry comes from the Khazars. That sounds to be very extravagant. It's like saying all Americans were born in Iowa and just spread out from Iowa. I mean, it just sounds to be very, very extravagant. But whatever they are, and however many people do get amalgamated, if they pledge allegiance, if they accept the values and identify with the history and become part of the group, they shouldn't have any effect whatsoever on the historical continuity and the historical claims of the group. Shouldn't make any difference at all. This is just one of the fantasies that is used in politics and passes for thinking when you're not thinking.
Right.
Don't mind me if I'm prejudiced. So I don't think it's just. I don't think it can be taken seriously. If you had some kind of genetic markers, then maybe you could make something out of that. But I can't. I don't believe that they've done that.
And you're saying even if it was true, it doesn't really delegitimize anything.
I don't think so. As I say, I think Christianity started out as a very small group. There are today 2 billion Christians. I don't think anybody say, your numbers swamp the original numbers, so therefore you have no connection with them, and you're not related to them, and you have no relationship with them. Why? Why would you say that? I just don't think it's right.
The paradox of free will on the one hand and God's foreknowledge on the other, Rambam mentions, I'm sure a lot of theologians and philosophers. What's the understanding of it?
There are 2 approaches which are found in our literature. One is a solution of the problem, and the other is a dissolution of the problem. I can tell you briefly how each one works. At least you'll get the headlines. Solution of the problem works this way. First of all, you have to understand what the problem is, and then you can understand how the solution works. Problem is this. I'm making a free choice. I'm choosing between A and B. I think about it, I deliberate, and finally I choose A. Now, did God yesterday already know that I was going to choose A? Of course. Well, if God already knew yesterday that I was going to choose A, could I have done B? Could I have done B? What would that mean? To say I could have done B means I could have made God's knowledge yesterday false. I could have made it false. That means God's knowledge yesterday isn't absolute. It isn't perfect. It isn't infallible, because I could I could make it wrong by choosing B. And that doesn't sound right. This is the conflict between God's knowledge on the one hand and free will on the other. It sounds like if I have free will, God can't know the future about my actions anyway. Now, the argument's a mistake. The argument is using a hidden assumption, which it keeps very carefully hidden under the table. But if you take that assumption out and put it on the table and take a look at it, you can see that if you don't accept the assumption, the argument doesn't go through. Let's rehearse it again. I choose to do A now. God yesterday knew that I was going to choose A. So could I choose B? Was B possible for me? If B is possible, then it's possible for me to contradict God's knowledge yesterday. Here's the assumption. When you imagine me doing B, you're holding God's knowledge yesterday fixed, constant, stuck, chiseled in stone, God's knowledge yesterday that I'm going to do A is totally independent of what I choose. That's what you're assuming. Imagine I just release that assumption. Imagine I say, God's knowledge yesterday is sensitive to what I do today. It tracks what I do today. Bertrand Russell, who defended the religious position on this matter, because he was an honest logician, said, all you have to imagine God yesterday is peeking ahead at today. He's peeking ahead at the future. That's hard for you and me. We're talking about God, right? So imagine God yesterday. God yesterday is peeking at today. There's Gottlieb making his decision. I wonder what he'll do. Let's see. Let's watch carefully. Choosing between A and B. I see that. Okay. Bang! He does A. That's how God yesterday knows that I do A today. He knows because from yesterday he's watching me today making my choice. So then, if instead of choosing A today, I chose B today, the God yesterday would know that I'm choosing B today. Because the knowledge yesterday is a result of my choice today. Now when you run through the argument breaks down. I choose A. God knows yesterday that I'm going to choose A. Could I choose B? Is it possible for me to choose B? Sure, because if I were to choose B, then yesterday he would have known B and not A. There'd be no contradiction. The failure in the argument is to assume that God's knowledge yesterday is independent of my choice today. This remark is made by Rav Saadia Gaon, by the Kedes Yitzchak, and by the Chuvas Rivosh. Three great Jewish commentators, separated by almost 1,000 years, and they all say the same thing. They all say the first two say one-liners. If you had chosen otherwise, God would have known. And the Rivosh has a long discussion of it, contrasting it with some things that other people say, which I used to say, but then I read the truth of the Rivosh, and I think I have a better understanding now. That's a solution to the problem. Okay? The Rambam has an entirely different approach. The Rambam dissolves the problem. And here too, I think a lot of inappropriate stuff has been written about this. The Rambam says, God is beyond all description. We cannot describe God at all. We never talk about what God is, we only talk about what God does. Therefore, if you're considering a contradiction between my free knowledge, my free will, and God's knowledge, well, we can't say God knows. Because we can't describe God. So there can't be a contradiction. One half is something we're not going to say. Don't make a mistake. If we don't say God knows, we're not implying that God is ignorant. Because that's another human description. And we can't say that either. We can't say he knows. We can't say that he's ignorant. We can't say, period. God's beyond all description. That being the case, you can't state the contradiction. You can't state the problem. That's why I call it dissolving the problem, not solving the problem. You can't even state it. Both of these approaches are perfectly adequate. And I can, by the way, in all the discussions I've seen of the Rambam's position, no one mentions the fact that in the Guide of the Perplexed, in the concept of discussing a certain Arabic view about God's providence, at the end he says, and by the way, according to this view, God knows everything and people have free will, which a moment's thought will show you is an absolute contradiction. He just throws it out at the end of a section, right? Which means he's telling you, if you took it seriously, it would be a contradiction. People who think he's giving a solution are mistaken. For him, it's clearly a contradiction. And so his approach is based on other considerations. Can't describe God at all, so you can't even state it. And if you will ask, since the Rambam comes after Rav Saadia Gaon, and he knew what Rav Saadia Gaon wrote, why wasn't he satisfied with Rav Saadia Gaon's answer? I don't know, but I can guess, based on certain things the Rambam wrote in particular places, like Part 1, Chapter 54 and other places, that the idea that my action causes God's knowledge makes God's condition dependent on what I do, and that's sort of demoting God too much. It makes him passive, it makes him changeable, it makes him subject to my causation. That's something which could be objectionable from a certain point of view, and from the Rambam's point of view, of course, that drops out entirely. So, but that's two ways to handle the problem in logic. As far as I can understand, they're both perfectly adequate.
I'm still stuck with the first one.
Yeah.
According to the first one, that his knowledge is not His knowledge is dependent on what's going to happen in the future.
Dependent. Is caused by. It's caused by what happens in the future. Yes.
Now, at the point in between the two, it's set in stone or it's not set in stone?
It's not what? I don't get
Is
you.
it at the point between, right before I do the action?
Yeah.
So, I'm still not sure. Is it determined already or not determined?
Nothing. It's certainly what you will do is certainly not determined.
But
Because his knowledge
is-
yesterday is caused by your choice now.
So it's a cause that's following this proceeding.
The effect precedes the cause. Now, if that bothers you, the cause comes after the effect. That seems very weird and crazy. And is that what you have to do in order to get by in justifying the Torah? Let me tell you a little background. Philosophers have been trying for 250 years to prove cause comes first and effect comes afterwards, and have failed. There's no argument that philosophers recognize cause has to come first. Okay, but that's just philosophers. They don't really count. That's just fluff. In physics, there are events which are interpreted by Richard Feynman and John Wheeler and other august physicists as cases where the effect comes first and the cause comes afterwards. So that they say that really happens in the physical world. So somebody's going to say that's crazy is running against all of philosophy, which is probably not a big gamut, and running against some of the greatest physicists. It's probably not right just to say that it's obviously crazy. There might be a problem here, but it's just not obviously crazy. Richard Feynman was not obviously crazy. He had a Nobel Prize in physics, one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, and he says it happens. So I don't think we have to be embarrassed about that. And that's within the physical world. We're talking now about God's relationship to the world. So we don't have to be embarrassed about that at all. Yeah.
On your solution to why the Rambam, your answer to why the Rambam didn't like what Sadia said, doesn't he accept that the entire relationship with God is a reactive relationship? Everything we do makes God act. God's entire relationship with us is based on what we do.
I was going to mention that as one of the things that they will agree to. Let's take reward and punishment. Reward and punishment. What I do gets me a certain divine reaction. So a certain responsiveness on God's part is, without any question, built into Judaism at the foundation. No one can simply disconnect God from what happens in the world. That's true. But the idea of causing God's knowledge is a little bit more dramatic than that. Let's ask a more primitive question, which Talmidim always ask. God says to Moses, I'm going to destroy the Jewish people. Moses says, oh, you can't do that. Listen to my reasons. 1, 2, 3. God says, okay, so I won't. Did God change his mind? Does Moses' prayer change God's mind? The answer, of course, is no. It does not change God's mind. God's mind is a fork to begin with. It's hypothetical. God's mind is, if Moses doesn't pray, then I'll destroy them. If Moses does pray, then I won't destroy them. When Moses prays, he isn't changing God's mind because God's mind already contains both alternatives. Same thing is true of reward and punishment. Reward and punishment are available, they're laid out, and depending upon what you do, you either activate this divine policy or you activate that divine policy. God doesn't change under those conditions. It isn't as if he said, I'm going to give you X. Oh, you did that? Scrap that. I'm going to do something else. Not true. It's not the correct picture. So none of this requires a change, so to speak, internal to God. Talk about knowledge, that's something else. Knowledge is a description which sounds much more internal than just a policy which remains the same policy unchangingly forever. And just it gets activated by different interaction with different particular items that the policy. I think of this, if you know football, as like a defensive quarterback. A defensive quarterback has trained his defensive team in a certain number of plays. When the offense runs a pass, he says, okay, 16. So they run an anti-pass formation. When it's a run up the middle, he says 22. And they line up for a run up the middle, right? The strategies are always the same. The code numbers are always the same. They're the ones that they've practiced. He just chooses them as the offense chooses its particular attack. So the strategy of the defensive quarterback doesn't change. He just uses it in response to the circumstances. That's not an essential change. A change in strategy, a change in play. We're now learning a new defense against long passes, And instead of 2 people going back, 3 people go back, and they'll go around the side. So that would be a change in the policy. Knowledge sounds like it's more internal. So I can imagine the Rambam saying, sure, interactions based on activating fixed policies, sure, that does happen. But changing something internal, like changing a policy, no, that I'm not going to tolerate. And the Rambam writes about God not being passive. That's in the end of 154. He writes about that, and it's an objection to picture of God being passive. I can imagine. This is only my speculation. I'm saying this for the 2 recordings. And this is only my speculation. I've never seen this written anyplace, but I can understand why the Rambam would not be satisfied with Saji Gaon's solution, because it paints God in a more passive framework than he would want to accept. Also, the Rambam saying that God is not describable is not a solution to the problem of free will and foreknowledge. It's general grounds on understanding of what God is and how language works and how the mind works and all the rest. And it just falls out that you then get a way to handle the foreknowledge and free will problem.
When educating the younger generation, should the educators provoke questions of philosophy and theology in them, or should they leave them and wait for the child to reach the point where?
I'll tell you, this is a problem for Gedolei Yisrael. Only the greatest sages and those who are responsible for the spiritual health of the generation can answer a question like that. Obviously, asking questions like that can have negative consequences, and it can have positive consequences. As a matter of weighing it up. There is someone who tries to do this in schools, and before Pesach took out an advertisement. We have the 4 sons with the 4 questions. What about the 5th question? Did it happen or not? And one of the Gedolim in America was incensed. He was extremely upset with raising it that way. So others say, but if you live in Los Angeles, you can't help it. There's somebody there who has the official title Rabbi, who's not a rabbi, is it? Ignoramus, who came out on the pulpit saying, we know it never happened, there never was an Exodus, it's all because of archaeology, and all the rest of that. So they say, but for these people, it already is a question. So then it may divide between different cities and different communities, different backgrounds. I'll tell you, I wrote this on my blog because I had a number of very disappointing experiences. Kids who, for whatever reason or another, are inclined to go off the derech, and they come home to their parents, and they say, "You know why I'm going off the derech? Because of Nietzsche." And the father says, "Nietzsche who? Nietzsche Smith down the road? Well, what is Nietzsche? Is it a spacecraft or?" Friedrich Nietzsche, the great German philosopher of Superman, transvaluation of values. So what is the father to do? He never heard of Nietzsche. He never heard of Superman, never heard of transvaluation of values. And the child gets tremendous points because the father is stymied. Sometimes the father tries to protest but he doesn't know anything about it. Sometimes the father just retreats because he doesn't know anything about it, so he doesn't have anything to say. One very tragic case, father called me up here in Yerushalayim. His son became non-religious, and he told him, I became non-religious because of the famous fundamental mathematical logical theorem proved by Kurt Gödel in 1931. So the father calls me, and he says, what do I do? I said, send him to me. Comes in, sits down, I said, okay, you have problems with Gödel's theorem. Let me tell you something. I wrote my PhD thesis on that theorem. Now let's talk about it. What does the theorem say? What does it mean? How does it apply? Right. First of all, he didn't have a clue what it meant. Second of all, when I explained to him what it meant and explained to him how it applies, it has absolutely nothing to do with cheeseburgers and girls and soccer games on Yom Kippur and all the rest of it. It had nothing to do with it. I said to him, look, you want a life, a non-religious life? Be honest. Don't pretend it has anything to do with Gödel. It has nothing to do with it. It's absolutely disconnected. So on this piece of my blog, I wrote the following. when the child comes in and he says, I'm doing this and this and this, what about this and this, this philosopher, one fellow came in, he became non-religious because of Spinoza. I said to him, Spinoza hasn't been quoted in 150 years. He's not a player. Nobody believes that Spinoza's ideas are right. At best, they say he's historical anticipation of something that's different and modern. You're doing it because of Spinoza? He was like hypnotized. Spinoza. Now, so I say to the parent and to the educator, when the child says, I'm doing this because of Spinoza or Nietzsche or Gödel or whatever it is, say to him, that's very interesting. I'm grateful that you're sharing with me. Please explain to me the words that you're using. I haven't heard them. I'm not familiar with them. Can you explain to me what transvaluation of values is? Can you explain to me what Superman is? So I'll be able to understand what you're doing. 5 times out of 10, the child can't explain it. He read it. He knows his father won't understand it. He uses it a technical term, and he just tries to blow him away. Can't explain it. Say to him, well, listen, I'm interested in what you have to say, and whatever interests you interests me. Go back and read it again, and see if you can get a clear understanding of what these words mean. Fine. The other 5 times, he'll explain it. Say, okay, let's see. Now I understand what this means. Now I understand what this means. Now tell me, what are you building on this? What conclusion do you get out of these concepts? Another half of the time, that's half of a half, quarter of the time, he won't be able to make the argument on the basis of the definitions he gives you. He gets stuck in the middle. Fine. You say, okay, so go back and try it again. And by telling him to go back and try it again, you're not encouraging him to continue his explorations in forbidden territory. What he's learning is his father's not so dumb, and that the child is not so smart. He just read a lot of terms that he hopes his father won't understand and blow him away, but when he's asked to actually explain it, he can't do that. Good. He comes back and he says, this is what they mean, this is how the argument works, and the father doesn't know an answer. The father should say, thank you. I've learned something. I wasn't aware of this, and I will think about it, and I'll get back to you. And then write to us. There aren't any new ideas under the sun. There aren't any new challenges under the sun. We who grew up in non-religious homes and became religious through a good secular education, we've been through all of these before, and we'll give you the answers. Do it with respect, do it with love, do it with concern, do it fairly, non-judgmentally, non-aggressively, and I think you can handle these problems. But a principal of a school in North America said, what do? A 15-year-old walked into his class one day, and he said, science can explain everything, so we don't need any God. I know at least 100 unsolved problems in science. 100 problems where they're scratching their heads and running for cover, where there's and controversies in science. He said, science has explained everything. That's just to put his Rebbe in the trash bin. You don't know what science is. I tell you science has explained everything. You can't say me no, so therefore I win. What he should have said was, that's interesting. I haven't heard this before. The science explained everything. Let me look into it, and I'll get back to you. Write to a few people who know, and we'll give them a list as long as your arm of things that science doesn't understand, or the number of times they've changed their minds over the last 15 years, which means they're going to change their minds in the next 15 years. Take it calmly, with respect, with consideration, and go to the sources and get it, and you'll be able to handle these challenges. Don't get blown away by it. Now, you talk about raising the questions. There are children who are looking for ammunition against their parents. You raise foreknowledge and free will, and you give an explanation. He doesn't hear the explanation, doesn't care about the explanation. He says, my father will never figure this out. My father will never figure this out. So, goes home, foreknowledge and free will, order the cheeseburgers. Because it's got to be wrong. The Torah has to be wrong. A better one, which people actually used, is, can God make a stone too heavy for him to lift? You think God can do anything, don't you? Well, watch. If he can make the stone, he can't lift it. And if he can't make the stone, that's what he can't do. He can't make the stone. See the way he can't do something. Bang, there's no God, get the cheeseburgers. Right? What's the father going to do? The father should say, that's interesting. I never thought of that. I wonder if other people have thought of it. I wonder, maybe somebody's thought about it. I'll get back to you. And then write to a few people and get the answer and say, you introduced me to something I wasn't aware of. I didn't know about it, but guess what? I wrote to so-and-so, and he presents this answer. Let's look at the answer together and see whether the answer makes sense. And, if it does, we have an answer. If it doesn't, we'll write to him, and we'll explore it. And, of course there are answers to questions like that. They're as old as the hills. So raising the questions can create as many problems as it could solve, and you need someone who's has a global view and has encyclopedic knowledge of the Torah and is what we call Siyata D'Shmaya, the help of heaven, to make a decision as to whether that should be done or not. As far as I'm aware, the majority view, and maybe it's unanimous, is that you don't do that. You don't go walk into a class and raise questions. That's as much as I know about it. Yeah.
What is the answer to that?
What's the answer to that? I'll tell you very briefly. I'll tell it to you in three brief stages. God could do anything. That's what people naturally think. But that's surely not correct. God cannot learn something new, can he? God cannot improve, can he? Some abilities are based on imperfection. To have the ability means you must be imperfect. We don't want God to have those abilities. Learn something new means you don't already know everything. To improve means you're not already perfect. So it's too naive and simplistic to say, sure, God could do everything. There are definitely exceptions. Now, second point, which is loosely related, but I just used the first point to sort of soften up the ground. Second point, when a person says a contradiction, he's saying nothing. There's no meaning to it. So the Rambam and the Malbim and others say, we are not going to say that God can make square circles. Not because it's too hard, but because when you say square circle, you're not saying anything. It's like asking, can God blah? Say, blah? What's blah? Blah is nothing, but can he? You got to say yes. You're from, right? You're very pious. You must say yes. No, excuse me. I only have to say yes or no if you ask a question. And you only ask a question if you use words that make sense. And blah isn't the word. So you haven't asked the question. So I don't have to say yes. Same thing true about square circle. Someone asks you, someone says to you, you're going to the mall? Yes. You have a spare $25? Yes. Do me a favor. While you're at the mall, pick me up a square circle. What would you say? Well, a square circle? I don't know where to look for that. You know, in the supermarket, in the hardware store, in the painting store, square circle? You know, you say the words, but nothing lights up in here. Nothing's going on. Square circle? I just don't know what you mean. Tell me in other terms, explain yourself some other way, or I can't help you. Because square circle doesn't say anything. Okay, so someone who asks, can God make a square circle? We're going to have the same reaction. That's just as bad as saying, can God blot? You're not asking a question because square circle makes no sense. All right, final step. Stone so heavy that God cannot lift it is just as bad as square circle. Watch, I'll show you. Stone so heavy that God cannot lift it means stone so heavy that God, who's all powerful, can't lift it. Which means stone so heavy that God, who could lift anything, can't lift it. Which means stone so heavy that God can lift it and can't lift it. Can lift it and can't lift it is a contradiction. At that point, if a person says, can God make a stone too heavy for him to lift? I say, what? Stone too heavy for God to lift is just a contradiction. When you speak in contradictions, I don't understand you because you're not saying anything. And therefore, I don't owe you a yes or no answer. The critic is assuming that when he asks this question, I have to give him a yes or no answer. That's how he tries to trap me. He says, if you say yes, he can create it, then he can't lift it. If you say no, he can't create it, then what he can't do is create it. Either way, he can't do something. What he doesn't anticipate is that my response will be to neither answer yes nor answer no on the grounds that he hasn't asked a question. And he hasn't asked the question because stone too heavy for God to lift is a contradiction. And all of this is written out. This is all written out on my website and under the miscellaneous tab in an article called Omnipotence and Evil, Part 1. So you can read it there in all detail. At any rate, what can I say? If I have something to contribute as a logician, so that's what I do. Time for one more question, then I've got to go upstairs and teach the other class. Yeah.
The machlokas between the Chassidim and the Vilna Gaon.
The Chassidim Vilna Gaon, yeah.
Today in Klal Yisrael, is there really any remnants of that, or is it basically gone? I mean, like, is there really any misnagdim left in that real term.
They tell a story that there was once a very rich man, and he had two kitchens, a milk kitchen and a fleshy kitchen. One son liked milchiks, and he ate the milky kitchen, one liked the fleshy kitchen. After a while, he lost all his money, and all he could afford was potatoes. But the milchik son ate the potatoes in the milky kitchen, and the fleshy son ate the potatoes in the fleshy kitchen. That's what we have left. We have potatoes left. we don't have a, number one. Number two, it is not clear what the original machlokes was. Some people who write about it, Rav Desta says that there was only one tiny point of difference, no fundamental differences of philosophy or values and so on and so on. It's a very complex and difficult issue. The history is told by partisans, because everybody's a partisan on one side or the other. As far as I know, there aren't any Sephardim who've investigated it, because they would be nonpartisan. And as you see, the two groups cooperate with one another and have a political party together with one another. Okay, there are tensions and so forth and so on, but they marry each other as children, and they go to each other's simchas, and they sit together and deliberate together. Sorry? Daven together. It isn't at all what it once was. And I think we're all the better off for that. So I think that at most it's a matter of historical interest. It's not a matter of contemporary
What
practice.
was the one different point you were speaking of that Rav Dust?
I'm trying to remember. It was a very... I don't remember. It was,
Encompassing everything, yeah. Is everywhere.
I don't remember. I don't know what it was, but it was a very, very minor, small point, and whatever it was at that time, and it might have been limited to only certain groups. Certainly, Vilna Gaon had no contact with the whole of Eastern Europe, so there were only a couple of groups that he may have known about, and perhaps he was responding only to those groups, as opposed to all the other groups, and the Hasidic groups differ from one another in very significant ways. So today it's a matter of history.